Hey everybody, my name's John F. McDropout. You know that because you're on my channel. The hangout we're about to do is a discussion between me and the what was it, infamous Trey Jadlow? I don't know. That seems like almost a little nefarious in its connotation there. He's been done me the pleasure of joining me in a live hangout. We're going to be discussing the apologetics of R.c.sproul, and specifically sort of the defense of the faith that he put together. In a video series that we were looking into, and me and Trey had some different ideas about the way that R.c. puts together this apologetic, and I think that Trey actually took a little bit of exception to my characterization of R.c.sproul as uncharitable and incoherent, and I think that's probably going to be our main point of contention. But I think that there's a lot of stuff that we probably agree on, and probably some pretty interesting takes on some of the stuff that we both find very fascinating. So with that, I'll welcome Trey to my channel. Thanks so much for joining me on this very rare broadcast I have on here.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the opportunity to interact, and I appreciate your charity.
Cool. Well, I hope you don't feel like it's charity in the sense that I feel like I'm talking down to you. I actually think you're quite a bright person, and in a lot of ways, I think that there are some really genuine mistakes that are going on here, and I mean that in the kind of the most genuine possible way. That like you're very I think you're earnestly looking at some very difficult issues and attempting to pull something together, and I think that's good. Mm-hmm. So I think with that, I think we probably have a lot to cover here. Did you want to get into this idea of uncharitability first?
Yeah, let's go ahead and touch on that, because I think it's kind of it's not the kernel of it. We talk of it because that anybody that knows R.c.sproul, uncharitable would, in fact, I had one of my atheist friends who knows R.c.sproul a little bit, and he laughed when I made that comment that R.c.sproul is uncharitable. And what was the other one? Incoherent.
Incoherent, right.
I mean, if there are two things that could be said about R.c.sproul with those who know him well, is that he is he's very rationally coherent. In fact, he could easily be called a logician, and he is very charitable. He's a professor, so he's not one to, and one thing about R.c.sproul that his enemies would never say about him is that he misrepresents, which when I think of uncharitable, oftentimes I think of people as ad hominem or straw manning their opponent. He never does it. He bends over backwards to very carefully express accurately what his opponents believe. And one thing, they may disagree with him on his conclusions, but they don't disagree with him on his characterization of their position. So both of those things to me were just like, what is he thinking? But so I'm very happy. So how do you feel like R.c.sproul is uncharitable?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think there is an element there where I'm of course I'm not saying that he is uncharitable as a person, or that in his lifestyle. Like personally, I don't think that R.c.sproul would be a very like he's not a jerk or anything like that. And I don't view him as that sort of sense. But in uncharitable, I do sort of sense that there is this element of straw manning that goes on with R.c.sproul. And in some of the examples he gives, I think is sort of the best way to look at it, right? When he's talking about people who believe in, like I remember he talks about he sort of summarizes existentialism as truth can be irrational, and then sort of just moves on after that, right? I think that that's a prime example of something that might be considered uncharitable. I think one of the first examples he gives is the Charlie is dead example of why proof and persuasion are different things, right? And I think that it's not a bad example of exactly what it means to be persuaded and why proof doesn't always equal persuasion. But I think it's unfair to characterize, and I think he goes ahead and makes that direct characterization that the people who are in opposition to theism, like atheists or unbelievers, are actually exactly like Charlie. Like they are they're denying that they're dead, or they're denying that they're alive. That there's even in the face of the evidence that they're currently learning and currently being shown. So I think that's a very uncharitable way of putting the opposition in a place that seems very dogmatic and seems very very shut to open to having their mind changed, right? And
So
I think that's
you would,
the first step.
yeah, but you're asserting that mankind is morally neutral, right?
No, like, and I think that's the other thing. You know, I think in a lot of senses, there's this assumption in R.c. Sproul that the ideal is that humans are perfectly rational, and I think that that's not the case, right? I mean, we can talk about logical compulsion and being reasonable in the face of evidence, right? And I think that what we mean is being amenable to change, but I think that that's right, that we don't necessarily have this perfectly rational sense of logic that kind of that humans have in an ideal sense.
Well, that seems to just contradict what you just said about Charlie.
Well, I think it is in a sense, right? But I think it's uncharitable, right? Like, if you're going to put yourself in your opponent's shoes, I don't think that ascribing a motivation that isn't an assessment of the evidence, right, is a helpful way of doing it.
What does Christianity teach about the human heart?
Well, it would take. I mean, I think total depravity is one of the first things in Calvinism, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about an element of degradation. There's got to be somewhat of a skewed filter that things are being seen through, right? But I wonder if.
So how is he being uncharitable?
Well, he's being uncharitable in demanding, like he says himself, that what we are supposed to do is eventually he's going to get to natural theology, right? And that there must be, and he'll just go ahead and assume that there must be some basic reliability of our senses that goes with that, right? And I think that is, if you're going to make that assumption, if you're going to say that we need to view nature in order to see God properly, you can't go ahead and make the assumption that the person that you're talking to isn't going to believe what they see, right?
Oh, yeah. We don't start out with that epistemologically. None of us do. We all start out epistemologically with our own existence, and none of us are at question as to whether God exists, yourself included. That's why you haven't been able to rebut the argument.
No, I mean that's the thing. Is like my existence isn't in doubt, right? In a lot of ways, he actually and me sort of stem from a similar vein, right? I think Descartes did prove that something exists that is having experiences, right? So from there, I mean, there is this element that we are talking about. Yes, there is something experiencing, but I don't think that you can really say that. You can go from that to the existence of something else, right? Something external. That's really the contention that we have, is that once we move to that external, looking at that thing from another point, I mean, we are no longer certain. There's a layer there of how does like he goes into Hume, how Hume has this contiguity, right? We see things in proximity to each other, and we assume that they're causally linked, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's that is the cause that we see. You know, that we can make that assumption.
Yes, but you know that there must be a cause, right?
Not necessarily, right? I mean, that's there was in that sense. Between me and R.c. Sproul, I think that he's being disingenuous or maybe uncharitable with Descartes, right? Descartes never states that he can be sure of his own existence, right? I mean, he makes it as a soul, and I think he runs from that assumption. But I think Descartes never makes the assumption of a singular cause, right? I don't think Descartes ever has any because I mean that was one of Hume's major assumptions or major problems, right? Was that there could be multiple causation to each causal event. There could be epiphenomenal causes to each causal event. So you could have 7 or 8 unseen causes that could be linked and directly associated with the effect itself, and it would
do you know the difference between instrumental cause and efficient cause?
Yeah, yes, and I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that we can't make classifications like that, but there still is an element of unknown cause, right? And he says himself that an unknown cause doesn't mean that there is no cause. And we can, and I think that, when we talk about epiphenomenal causes, those are by definition unknown causes.
I don't think you know what the difference between instrumental and efficient cause is, do you?
Okay, well, maybe explain the distinction in this context.
Well, just tell me you don't know what it is.
I obviously don't know what.
Okay, great. That's the important thing we're talking about. The difference between instrumental and efficient cause is instrumental is one that is used in the process of causality. Sometimes it can be called secondary causality, and you've got primary causality. And secondary causality is what we see in the universe. You can see different maybe materials working together and seeing something effect out of that, and so you get this cause and effect relationship. The thing is though, all of those effects or all those causes that you're talking about that are instrumental were, before they were causes, they were effects. So in essence, at base, they're all effects. Now, if I can only, you said, we don't know anything about the external world. I don't need the external world. All I need is myself as an inquirer, and I know that I myself as an inquirer am not self-existent. Now we know that stuff that is not self-existent is not non-dependent, and if it is not non-dependent, then it is dependent on something for its existence. It did not affect itself before it had its ontology. That's what contingency means. So I'm hearing you go on, and I don't mean that to be uncharitable to you. Remember what I said? You guys are like a bunch of sixth graders trying to do nuclear fusion. You don't even understand.
Yeah, I thought that was a little uncharitable also, but no, that's fine. No, but actually that was one of the more constructive criticisms, I felt like, because I did feel like we didn't really, like I was mentioning to you before we went live, that I felt like we didn't actually get to the real heart of what that argument was constructed as, because it really is a whole piece, right from the first video to the 25th video. He's really laying out a system by which he's kind of making these connections, right? And I think that when you view it like that, does actually make a little more coherent sense, right? So we'll get to incoherent here in a sec, because I don't mean it in that sense, obviously. No, I think when I mean uncharitable, I mean he has numerous examples where he's in conversation with people, and I think how he describes these conversations is very telling as to how he sort of views the opposition, right? He mentions a scientist who claims something about like uncaused effects or something like that, and I think that clearly is an uncharitable reading of what that person was saying, right? I think you can see from the context, even in the statement that Sproul kind of takes it as, that the word effect there is to me meant synonymously with event, right? I mean, he's talking about an uncaused event happening, which is obviously, I mean, that's not obviously not much better, but it's not as
better. Is it any different?
It's not as dichotomous. The context makes it not as dichotomous as simply claiming it's a uncaused effect, and I think that's an important distinction. And maybe
it's rubbish, my friend.
Yeah, well, okay, we can discuss that. But I felt that that's not necessarily a charitable way of placing that person's statement. Another example was he talks about a university student that he talks to about subjectivity and relativism, and how people can have their own truth, right? And I think he really gives it like this, in this really ham-fisted way about that it's just, you're not talking about objective reality when you start to say like this person has this truth and this person has their own truth about the same thing.
That's the whole point.
And in a way, I think that it is true when we're not talking about objective reality, but I think that the university student was clearly trying to get to the idea that we all approach each problem with our own set of experiences and information.
But there's only one way that's right?
But to assess truth, we make comparisons versus our experiences, right? I mean, we're making comparisons.
Conventional, right?
Truth is explain what you mean by that. Truth is not conventional.
Truth is not something we just make up. It's not an emotion that we have. There is an external reality that we conform to. It's not something. So, for example, the example he uses is God's existence. Whether you like it or not, either God exists or he doesn't exist. Whether I want him to or you don't want him to, it doesn't matter whether he exists one whit.
Right, because I think in the example I'm remembering, the university student asked him like, well, I mean, do you believe in God? Do you act as if God is real? He asked him about R.c. Sproul's kind of experience with God, and then says, well, God is real for you, right? And R.c. Sproul says that like you can't believe God and make him real, right? Your belief in God can't make the thing itself real. And I think there's there's a distinction there where that's a really uncharitable way of what the university student was trying to say, right? I think that's not necessarily, he's trying to say that concept can be talked about as if it is real with a believer, right? I mean, we can view that concept as being real to that person, and I think that's not conceptually that's not a mistake to make in the linguistics itself. I think that is simply an uncharitable way of addressing the context of it.
Did you happen to go to school at MU, University of Missouri?
No.
My very thin skin there.
What kind of skin there?
Thin skin. They're a bunch of babies.
Oh yeah, that's true.
They get mad. Everybody's too mean to me. I need my safe space. That's what you sound like.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I do have a very soft spot for liberalism. Some people might call me a social justice warrior, derogatorily, of course. And I think in a lot of ways I do identify with modern feminism, anyways. But
you have a robust funny bone.
Thanks.
Do you?
Yeah, I hope I do. I hope I do.
Good.
I can take.
That's what I can't stand is people that can't take a joke.
Yeah, so I hope that I take all of the funny stuff seriously, and I take all of this seriously stuff with a grain of salt, right? Like life's too short to be always sour and dour, right?
I agree. Yeah.
I'm very much about grabbing life for what it is, right? I kind of take a lot of life from existentialist reading and things like that, where we're told to take life authentically and really grab on and take control of our choices and really own what it is that we do.
Yes, but you need to move beyond the mere contingent existentialism, because it's not a very coherent worldview.
Yeah, I don't know. I find there's a lot there that really does line up with reality and ends up making a lot of sense. But it's not for everybody, and it takes I've only really just begun the study, so who knows? Maybe I'll change my mind. I think it's what is it, Muhammad Ali, who said that, like, if you think the same way at 20 as you do when you're 50, you haven't really lived.
That's probably true. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, So I mean, as far as uncharitable goes, like I really do feel like he is being maybe a little unfair to a lot of what he views as the opposition.
Well, so far you've been just whining like a little kid.
Well, I think that when he's talking about like Kant is I think that was one of my, it sort of ground on me a little bit, because his reading of Kant was very, I felt I don't know if it was, I don't know, maybe it's because I haven't read the one that he was referencing. I don't remember what it was called anymore. It's like
Critique of Pure Reason.
No, I've read the Critique of Pure Reason. It was the other one, the Critique of Pure Judgment, I think is the one.
No, it's
because Pure Reason I definitely did read.
Critique of Pure Reason and Critique of what is it?
Oh, it might have been
It's his moral argument, huh?
Oh yeah, he does go into that. I think it is. I think it is judgment, but it is where he brings up his moral argument. And I felt like I wasn't really familiar enough with that one to really like make a direct comment about. But I really felt like he sort of like contradicted himself when he was sort of explaining what Kant was trying to do. And he ends up saying that like Kant was trying to
critique of practical reason.
Practical reason, that's what it was. Practical, yeah. Yeah, you got it. Thank you very much. I'm going to write that down right now. But like Kant was, he claims that Kant was trying to attack reason in order to make room for faith, and I felt like that was a really weird way of putting it.
That wasn't a criticism of him. It's just
no.
And I think his goal.
It was a summary, right?
He was a theist. You know that, right?
Yeah, I do. Most of the guys from those times, right, were theists, and I'm fine with that, right? It doesn't actually bother me, and I feel I try to make sure that I don't let it sort of influence my bias about what it is that they're saying, despite the fact that they might be getting towards a proof for the existence of God or something like that. I oftentimes find that they're very interesting when they do get to the proofs of God, and I find that's like the most rewarding part. But I felt like he was, when he sort of says, when he talked about Kant, I mean, he says that that he was trying to make room for faith, but then in the end it becomes like this weird fight between Paul and Kant, right? He's claiming that, you know, if what Kant is saying is true about the noumenal realm, then the unbeliever has an excuse for not believing, right? And I felt it was really weird to say that he's attacking reason in order to make room for faith, when in the end it becomes impossible to make that leap, right? He almost makes it necessary for faith to intervene to make that leap, right?
That's what he taught.
But I feel like that almost is like the opposite of what he ends up doing, right? Here, where
Kant?
is it? I got it. Yeah, because it says that.
How did he categorize God?
Well, because at the beginning, he, like, right before that, he actually says that Kant reads Hume, and he's worried that Hume's extreme skepticism would lead to the destruction of all faith in science. So he says that Kant was trying to rescue science from skepticism.
Yeah.
And I feel in a lot of ways that is the case. Kant was trying to look for a way of categorizing the things that were unable to be addressed by skepticism, and I think that's it. In some ways, that is making room for faith, but it really is advocating complete fideism, right? Which is exactly what Sproul wants to push against. He wants there to be a justified reason, a rational reason for. And so I felt like in the end he ends up giving Kant Kant does in fact claim that, you know, all arguments for God are actually ontological arguments, right? And that we infer them from the being itself.
John, let me say something. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness, because it would take me about 30 times listening to this. You know how many times I've listened to these series, and you've got a lot of this down, so I appreciate that. Yeah, like I really wanted to make sure I wasn't like glossing over or trying to dismiss it right off the bat, because I felt like you weren't really getting a fair shake as long as people weren't understanding the terms that you were using here. And it did. And once I watched the series, I actually did see how a lot of it relates to what you are talking about. And I can see that the Sproul has had a pretty big influence on the way that you talk about these things. It's everything.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say everything. I do feel like you've added little parts here and there, and I think that there are some real bright spots there. So I hope we can get to that towards the end here, or maybe we can do that in another hangout. And if we just want to fight for this one.
Noted.
Okay, cool. But yeah, like that's the thing is that Kant talks about like unbridgeable chasms, right? And these things, and I think that it's weird to hear Kant and Paul put side by side like that, right? And the whole thing about that is that it really does deal with the general revelation, right? I mean, I think that's the big thing here. And I just find it's very it's almost like he's claiming Kant for himself, despite the fact that Kant falls on the wrong side of the argument, right? And I think that's where I felt like.
Sproul is siding with Kant.
I feel like he wants to side with Kant, right? Because he's very much because in the end he ends up talking about that Kant is really just talking about the same thing that Aquinas is talking about, right? Where between grace and nature is the difference between the noumenal and the phenomenal. And then he goes in to talk about the Song of Solomon's, in which everything under the sun is the noumenal realm, or everything under the heavens is the noumenal realm, and everything under the sun is the phenomenal realm, right? And so he's
trying to do away with the noumenal realm altogether.
Sproul wants to make sure that the knowledge of God is not in that noumenal realm, but I feel like he wants to keep the noumenal realm around. He almost needs that level of mystery to contain some parts of the God, right? Of the least of the conception of God, right? Because he's going to put parts of that out of our reach, right? He's going to talk about finitum non capito infinitum, right? And the idea is that we can't grasp the infinite. And I think that's not
the noumenal realm. That's just an ontological difference. How do you communicate perfect being? Because once you communicate it, it becomes, right?
Ontological difference. I guess I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what you mean. If it's a difference in ontology, I sort of understand what you mean, but isn't that difference in ontology the fact that it's ungraspable, right? That there's a piece of that ontology that remains a mystery.
It has to be, because we are happening beings. Happening cannot You can't even have a simple thought, John. It's not possible. You must predicate about everything you do because you are a becoming creature. Of course, he's got to use analog.
Yeah, I mean, I exist temporally.
That's right. And time is the measurement of change among material objects.
That's one way of looking at it. I think as far as change goes, I think that is an element that's within time, right? But there's also this very strange disconnect between the language that you end up using when you talk about ontological and when you start talking about an inability to reckon with the beginnings, or an inability to talk about the causal agency, right? So when we talk about ontological, there has to be some sort of systematized way of getting to that beginning, right? To that causal agent, and I think that's sort of where I'm not seeing the connection, right? I think he's making that leap to the eternal being as the causal agent, which I think is it's difficult to make that turn. So
how do you not know how to think? Do you not believe in a law of non-contradiction?
Right. I think that's actually a really great place to go to next, right? The law of non-contradiction, I feel like, doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily adaptable to all rules of logic. In the way that Sproul, it is. I mean, it's an element of description in the world that is required and necessary for any sort of semantical construction or linguistic construction.
And are you making a semantical linguistic construction right now?
Always. So all argumentation ends up being in linguistical structure. So to point out that logic is necessary for that, I think, is to put the cart before the horse. We're not necessarily talking about logic being the thing that we're constructing this everything out of, right? I mean, logic is simply the way that we describe things that make sense to us, that compares.
It's called the organon. It's the instrument. It has no material in it whatsoever.
No, see, but that must be a reification by necessity, right?
No,
I mean, you can't say that it is the organon, because it isn't doing anything. It isn't actively organizing the world.
It's not material
right?
whatsoever. It is an instrument that you cannot inquire without. Logic is just a measurement of the subject with the predicate in a statement.
But I mean, you say that it's an instrument, right? And I think that's another reification. It's you're trying to put it into terms of a tool, which is fine metaphorically, but not necessarily directly analogically.
Is it something that you need in order to do anything with regarding logically?
Mm-hmm. Not anything logically, right? I can make logical systems, and I can erase. I can have illogical systems that I can make in my head. But once I start to semantically put them into words and attempt to describe them in any sort of dialogue or even a monologic sense, you're going to end up using the laws of non-contradiction and any sort of laws of logic to help construct that. Because
all right, so are you reifying it then?
I'm not. No, exactly. See, it is only the way in which we construct things so that things reflect the reality around us. So I think that's simply an arrangement. I'm not saying that logic
is that arrangement real.
That arrangement is real when I say if it's real. I don't know what do you mean by real? Like,
well,
is
I'm
that
just saying, is it something that really does guide the relationship of ideas that you have in order so that they can be coherent from your perspective?
It's I mean, that's the thing, right? It's purely linguistic in a lot of senses, right?
Okay.
If someone wants to, it exists.
I'm not saying it has a head like the Incredible Hulk.
I mean, logic exists in the sense that you're listening to me now, and so yes, of course, the words that I'm saying, we're both working on the assumption of a logical framework in which the words I'm saying aren't going to be different or mean different things. But there's an element there where linguistically we also have to come to agreements about the meaning of words, or meaning isn't being transferred between us, right?
Okay, but that's not logic. That is
someone who's speaking Chinese to me, I'm only going to understand maybe 2, maybe 3 words out of that, and that is not going to be a logical construction. It could be incoherent to me, and despite the fact that construction
is exactly the same as you have it, only they use a mode of expressing it. Do you agree with that? In other words, they have an idea that, say, a cat is not a dog, And so they may say it in Chinese. It doesn't matter. The concept is still the same thing, guided by the laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, the law of excluded middle.
I mean, I don't think that's always the case, right? I mean, you can look into Hindu societies where the word today, tomorrow, and yesterday are all the same word, right? That is not necessarily a contradictory idea, as long as the conception that they have of that is consistent in that society. Now, I think that's an easy example of why we're not talking about an entity or a pure logic that exists anywhere else in a proper form. I think that can't be the case. It has to be that we construct it to reflect the reality that we see.
Yeah, that's right. It has to reflect the reality. This is why I don't like existentialism. You've been infiltrated with it already.
It's probably true.
So is Hinduism valid as much as atheism is?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If it would be valid
Just
if I was talking
a lot of people
to a
hold
Hindu.
a certain geographic location.
No, I mean, it all depends on who I'm talking to, right? Like validity.
So if they have hair that is blue, then it makes sense.
Even if, I mean, even r.c.sproul admits that validity ends up being context specific. It ends up being hearer dependent, right? When we talk about these things, we make the assessment of its validity. And I think that if I was talking to a Hindu, I think if I was talking to a Hindu person and I said the word yesterday, and they took it to mean tomorrow, I think that would make sense to them, and that would be a failure of interpretation.
Let's go for coffee today, and when are they going to show up?
Never know. It could be tomorrow. Could be the next.
That's really helpful. Boy, that's great.
I mean, but that's their conception of time, right? I mean, today and tomorrow are the same thing. Well, it may not be practically good, but it worked really well in their society for a long time.
Right. It's just as good as atheism, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
an atheist is not as good as theirs, or it's the same.
No, I mean, listen, each one is going to have pluses and minuses, and the ideas that they are used in society, doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best for that society, or that compared to mine that they might be adequate. Even, there are probably ways in which someone who is better educated probably could construct more logical statements or really get further clarity into what they're saying. And I think that's not necessarily something that means that those people are wrong, but it means that they're
wrong.
No, it means they just don't have the clarity of words to really describe what it is
they're wrong. Mean. Just say it. They're wrong.
No, I mean that's the thing. Is like I see r.c.sproul. He claims the need to have mystery, right? I mean, for there to be things that he can't describe, that are indescribable, that we really just can't explicate, but we have to accept, right? And I think he claims that right for himself, but he denies it of everybody else. We as humans always have things that we end up believing without really good reasons, and we also have things that we take on that we can't really explain, that we believe, and we really do use that belief to model the world around us and to interact with it, but we don't necessarily have an explication of that belief. And I think that's not necessarily contradictory or an indicator of who's right or wrong.
Well, I think it is. Do you believe in correspondence theory of truth?
No, not really. I mean, I think correspondence is I think it's a great start. It's a way to get to that point. But I think that there is a lot to do with the validity of our senses that leaves that sort of in the air, right? I mean, simply it being correspondent doesn't necessarily mean it is true. But I mean, a lot of people go that direction, especially when we're talking about existentialist philosophy or even relativist philosophy, right? So I think would you think that r.c.sproul would kind of go with that? I mean, I don't think he ever really defines truth quite like explicitly like that. Do you think he would go with the correspondence?
Yes, he does. Because
I mean, that's interesting, right? I mean, it really does sort of rest on the assumption of the reliability of our senses in that sense, right?
Yes.
If they're,
but it's the only connection we've got, even though it's flawed, even though it's difficult. That's all we got.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that too, and I think he does hit that point actually. Now that I think about it, yeah, I mean, he does point out that we're really sort of subject dependent, right? I mean, we're definitely seeing things from a point of view, but I was always like, it seemed to me like r.c.sproul really loves to give us the he seemed really happy to give us like the etymology of words, and he seemed really excited about that. And I think that there is an element there that sort of is really poignant, right? I mean, learning about how words have developed is really a great way of doing it. And I was curious about what was it? He talks about where are we going here? I was thinking, well, maybe we'll just hit this up. R.c.sproul seems to have it in a little bit for presuppositional apologetics. I noticed a whole section on that. What were your kind of thoughts on that? Like, I really one of the things that I really liked here, I'll say, is that he pointed out that our knowledge isn't necessarily circular. Like, it's much more likely to be described as sort of a linear progression, right? Yes. Where we're going to find a base and we're going to work upwards from that. And I think that that's a really great way of looking at it, and I think the proper way of looking at epistemology. So, I mean, what are your kind of thoughts on that? Do you have?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. We were talking about Kant a little bit ago.
Yeah.
And it is my belief that presuppositionalists have fallen dead at the feet of Immanuel Kant, and they don't even know it. And what they do is they say, well, God can't be proved, therefore we will just accept it by faith. And the problem I have with presuppositionalism is it boils down at the very minimum. John, when I say to you, and I give you my apologetic, I am telling you, believe in presuppositionalism because I say so. That's what I hear when I hear the presuppositions. That's all I hear them say. And to me, I think that's a very dangerous position to take for anybody. And I'm going to make some people really upset if they see this. But the more I interact with presuppositionals, the more alarmed I become, because it is a circular epistemology. It begs the question. And you're basically telling people, believe me, I am the authority, and I'm telling you what's true. Bow the knee, and it's like, no, that's what airplanes into buildings are about. That's what Kool-Aid in Guyana is about. We should never believe somebody just because they say so. We need to own our ideas.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Precept asks you, how does he say? He says, it's like Precept asks you to start with God as the first assumption, right? And I think that he says that nobody starts with God but God, and I think that was a really great way of putting it, right? It's really putting the cart before the horse to start with the assumption of God, because it makes it so much more difficult to make an assumption of your own existence at that point, right? When you start from that.
Well, and the thing is,
I think he's right that it does build in that sense more linearly if we start from our own realization of our own existence, which he says is not. Yeah,
we can't start anywhere else. We've got to start with ourselves. And here's what the presuppositionalists do: they confuse the primacy of God ontologically for the primacy of discovering God epistemologically. They confuse those two categories, and they say they're starting with God. They really didn't start with God. They really started with their own epistemology, but they just don't want to admit it because it sounds pious to start where they're at, and it makes it so they can never lose. It's impossible for them to lose because they are begging the question, But it doesn't impress anybody who's thinking it through,
Yeah, exactly. I think he even hits that point, that anybody who's looking at that is going to see that it really is a dishonest way of getting to that step, right? And that little dishonest step that they're going to have and all those unstated premises is going to be the thing that keeps the unbeliever out of it. And I think that's the case, right? I'm more of the assumption that, if God wants me, let's just say, or any unbeliever to believe in him, there really needs to be a logical progression in that sense, like something that's really compelling. And I think that's a laudable aim that RC really is aiming for. He wants something that's just absolutely dead set compelling. And I love that aim. I think that's a really great place to shoot your arrow anyways.
Yeah, we're living in a time of unprecedented fideism in the church, where it's considered virtuous to believe without reason. I don't think it's historic Christianity, and I don't think it's biblical Christianity. And just because we are living in a technological age in the 21st century does not mean that we see everything the best way it's ever been seen. In fact, I criticize the scientific community too for not thinking very deeply. I think that we need to return back to some contemplative thinking pre-Kant, because Kant was the hinge, in my view, who brought destruction to deep thinking, in my view, and gave rise to things like existentialism and pragmatism and positivism, which are all silly ideas, in my view. I don't think we're nearly as sharp as we think we are, and I think we would do well to go to a renaissance in philosophy.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's in some ways I feel like you're not being too fair to existentialism and all these other ones, but there are. I will agree that philosophy has lost sight of a lot of the basics that have already been discussed and already been, not determined, but I mean there are a lot of ground that people are trying to cover that has already been covered by a lot of these great thinkers, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, all of these, and I think even Cicero to a certain extent. And so there are guys who have done a lot of the heavy lifting, in a lot of these senses, and I think that we should look back to them as much as we can. But I think even he would say that we got to be careful not to have like stultified knowledge, right? I mean, he says that Aquinas would say that he would encourage his students to learn as much as they can in as many fields as they can, right? I mean, we don't want to think that we have the knowledge and let that be a stopping point, right? I think that there needs to be a continuation. But I will agree that a lot of this stuff ends up being dismissed as old and irrelevant, and I think that that's not the case with philosophy, right?
Yeah, I think R.c.Sproul talks about this in The Consequences of Ideas. He said he spoke with an individual. He said he's the head of some philosophy department in some university, and when he was a graduate student, I think it was, or maybe as a doctoral student, he said, he came to me and said, R.C., he goes, the thing that I've come to learn about philosophy, he said that he's talking about the pre-Socratics already figured everything out. Now, they may have been in a very elementary sense, and we've refined it quite a bit, but he said there are only so many questions you can ask, and those guys asked them all. And again, in their very primitive understanding of the way things are in science and stuff like that, but still, they ask all the questions. There's nothing new under the sun. There is repackaging of things, and there is going back around, and there is a refining because of our instrumentation that we're able to give and stuff like that. So I'm not saying, but the fundamental questions, they've all been asked, and what we've done, I think, during Kant's revolution, the Kantian revolution, we lost a lot of that, and I think we've lost a lot when we threw out Aristotle's fourfold causality. With the scientific revolution, we basically just looked at the way this piece of matter materially reacts with this piece of matter without thinking about the metaphysical qualities of those things and how they interact with each other. And I think we've lost a lot by that. I think we would do well to return back to some of that.
Cool. Well, on that, I think I would emphasize that a lot of existentialist thinkers do, in fact, harken back to a lot of those ancient time, or a lot of those thinkers.
Yeah, the ones that agree with them.
Yeah, I think that Heidegger actually is one who really values Aristotle and really does attempt to include him in the thinking. But I think it's a tangent. We're not necessarily. I think we're just both saying how much we like the old stuff. I've always read that stuff, and I really enjoy it.
John, can you tell me a little about your background? I don't know anything about you. Are you a philosophy student, or you just like to do it on your own, or what?
Yeah, I'm just doing this on my own. I don't know. I think I kind of came to the realization I was an atheist. It must have been 5 or 6 years ago, and sort of started calling myself that and moving into it. But as I sort of started to discuss it and talk to people about it, I realized that there was a lot I was missing. I don't know. Maybe my background would be helpful. Like
Yes.
I grew up in a Pentecostal home.
Okay.
It was I went to a private Christian school, and I was quite isolated until I was about 15 or 16. I didn't have a lot of outside influences or pop culture stuff going on. And sort of as I kind of moved into high school and started to spread my wings a little, questions started to develop. About 16, I kind of moved away from Pentecostalism per se, but I was still in some evangelical churches until I was about 18 or 19. And then I started really pushing away and really moving into. I was looking for other spiritual experiences. I kind of did a lot of reading into Hinduism, Buddhism, a little bit of a little bit of Islam is what I was going to say. So I read a little into the Quran and some of the surahs. And you know, I was looking really for anything to kind of rest my laurels on, and it really sort of just occurred to me that my conception of God seemed a lot different than other people's, and I sort of, you know, I think a lot of people just kind of push out on their own and kind of become spiritual rather than religious. And from there, it really just degraded into, I really not degraded. I think I upgraded in a lot of senses. I came to realizations about what it is I believed, and read a lot and thought a lot about it, and I've kind of come to this conclusion, more of a stance of anti-theism at this point, where whether or not I believe in God, I don't necessarily believe that believing in God is a good thing. So that's really the best way to sum up where my position is now.
So how do you justify good?
Yeah, good is better. I usually call it better. Good is usually a comparative term, and so whenever I discuss good, I try to think of it as a state of improvement, or as a state of improvement over a compared element or property.
So would you say that that is a moral imperative?
Yeah, I mean, I really love Kant's moral imperative. I think that you know, good being better is not necessarily against that, because I think that a lot of the moral imperative is the idea. I mean, his first moral imperative is the idea of universality or universalization. I think he calls it universability. You know, our ability to say that if everybody followed this rule, the world would be a better place or a good place, right? And I think that that's what I mean, right? When I mean that there is an imperative that is good. So
your moral imperative is based upon the sanctity of existence.
Not necessarily, because I've heard you use the wording sanctity of existence, and I'm a little hesitant to sort of agree to it off the bat.
What would you like to use?
I mean, there's a value to life, right? But
Because
I think
life
sanctity,
is valuable?
Life is valuable for what it can add to life.
So it's valuable.
There's an element there where it is valuable, right? Yeah, I think I do see it as valuable.
Okay, how do you justify that?
Well, I mean, I can justify it through many different ways, right? But I think when it comes down, if I was to push it into like a moral imperative, it would have to be the universalizability, right? I mean, we're talking about. I'm just combining the two words now. I'm just talking about the idea that, you know, that if everybody did this, it would be good, right? If everybody respected life, or if everybody valued life, then everybody's life would be much better.
Right. So why are you treating life as if it's objectively special?
Well, I mean, I have life, right? As far as I know, and I think that experience of life obviously gives me a view on what it means to be alive, and I think that all I really have to do is just apply that to the universe, right? But like, I wonder when you use the word like sanctity of existence, right? When I think of sanctification, right, I think of like being set aside, or being almost unquestionably special, right? It's like this very it's almost like this purification that's taken place about the concept. It's this.
Isn't that how you treat it?
But I wouldn't call it that, right? I think like, I value life, but when I see it as a moral issue in life, then I like, or when I'm viewing life as like, let's say in a moral situation, then I have to weigh various levels of life, right? It becomes very much about life versus life. So I think that you can't really say that there's the sanctity of life. There's this absolute value of life giving, right? Because a lot of the situations and morals that we're talking about are going to be weighing lives against lives, and that can be a lot of, or weighing quality of life against life, and that can be very difficult to do sometimes.
Yeah, but you always end your post by saying peace and love.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And it's very important to you to treat other human beings as if they are, let's say, the crown of creation.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think
Why is that?
you know, my name actually means gift of God, right? And my dad used to remind me of that when I was a kid, all the time. And I think that I want people to know that same thing. I want them to know that they are special, you know, that their point of view is valuable to me, and that what I wish for them is the same thing I wish for myself. You know, a level of peace and contentment in life, and in the sense that they are in fact valued and cared for. So I think that the peace and love sort of does give me a sense that I mean, it reminds me anyways. That's why I put it at the end of my post. It's not necessarily for you. It is my thoughts towards you, but it's a way of reminding myself that that's what I wish for people.
But it's not true, right?
Well, it's true enough that it is applicable in my life.
So it is true.
There's an element there where it is reflective of what I would say is true. Yeah.
So it's objectively true that people are special.
People are special. Yes.
Okay. How do you justify that?
I justify it by each person being unique from each other, right? The differences that I notice make it justifiable that they're special. Right? Because
people are different, therefore they are special. In other words, you're saying you're saying there's objective value to existence, but there's no objective valuer.
Well, I'm the objective valuer.
No, you're subject.
But you're asking me to.
And remember, you're promoting this as a moral imperative upon others.
Well, I mean, no, I mean I think that was the main. That's one of the main misunderstandings with Kant's moral imperative. Is it's not actually a normative imperative. The universalizability is only meant to be a theoretical application. He calls it in the realm of ideas, right? I mean, there's almost like this. It's meant to be where you think about a community in which all of this is happening, but it's never meant to be applicable to everybody.
And why did he say that was necessary?
Well, he said that this was necessary. I mean, what do you mean by that? Because I noticed that R.c. actually mentions that Kant believes that God is necessary as not necessarily as an existent grounding of morals, but that the assumption of God would be necessary in order for the function of society.
Well, from Kant's perspective, it was like existence would not be possible. It's an existential reality. But in other words, he said, yes, we must treat everybody as if they are special because God makes it so, because we could not live otherwise. So his epistemological understanding is flawed, but you understand that he has to ground it rationally in God creating mankind in order for there to be objective value.
I'm not sure if I see the connection, right? Like the objective value doesn't necessarily come from the source of the creation, right? I mean, that's the real problem.
It's objective, my friend. Ask all your atheist friends if there's objective value to existence, and they will all tell you. You're the first one to say yes. But these other guys are more consistent.
Beauty, really, I mean, because it's weird because I think that there is value in. I mean, the word existence, I think, is sort of throwing me a little bit because maybe it's just all the existential literature I read because the word existence gets used probably far too often. So, I mean, do you mean life by existence, right? Like a living being, something that might be called like an existent or a being.
I would even say rocks. Here's my thing, John.
Because I think that's where my disconnection is like when you say like the sanctity of existence. Like I envision, yeah, like I mean, but I don't think that a rock is sacred.
I'm not saying you're on the same scale. If I'm going to use a body term, scalier or something, scalier or whatever.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
But I would say everything is contingency necessarily must be valuable by definition. Otherwise, it would not exist because it's dependent and it had to be created. And it has to be valuable, otherwise it would not be. I don't know. I mean, I think bit of existence must be contingent existence.
I don't know. Okay. So I kind of see what you're saying there, and in some ways there's an element there where I say, okay, yes, you're right. Like for something to exist, there may be a reason for it, right? There may be a reason for its existence that is valuable to some entity that started it, but I don't think that necessarily is the case, right?
Its existence at every moment.
Like the value that I have to like any item that I might look around in my kitchen, right? It doesn't necessarily translate that the person who created that had that same value, right? So I could value a teacup more than the person who created it, or I could value a comic book more than the original creator. Sure, I could. I mean, comic books increase in value all the time. I could value a #1 action comic book more than the original creator of that, who only sold it for 10 cents. I think now it's worth about 35,000 in mint condition. So if we were to talk about valuation actually does change with the context of who is valuing it, and I think that's where I find like there's a disconnect there, where we say like there must be someone who applies the value before any of us has assessed the value. I think that's where I can't get on board with it, because when you say sanctity of existence, then I see rocks and I say I don't value a rock, and I would kick a rock any time of the day as long as it didn't hit anybody or damage any property, right?
Let's imagine
but I would never kick a baby or a person or a dog, right? And I think that's where I have trouble viewing what you mean by sanctity and what you mean by existence. I think
I think all existence is like I said, it must be valued in order it wouldn't be. Let's imagine that you're in a neighborhood of wolves, and you have a pile of rocks and a bunch of mortar. Are those rocks valuable to you?
Suddenly those are the most valuable rocks in the world, right? And I think you got that right. It's very context dependent.
That's right. And it's all based on the sanctity of existence, right?
Not necessarily, right? Because those those rocks are valuable, right? But like, so in a wolf pack, like a gun is valuable in that sense, but it's only valuable if you're willing to take out certain parts of that existence or rearrange certain parts of that existence, right? You're going to use that gun on a wolf, or at least to scare those wolves away. And I think that those values change with the context. And
they always seek toward the highest value of existence. In other words, you value existence in a higher level than the wolves do, and you are going to sacrifice those wolves in order to protect your baby daughter. Okay, and every law that was ever made is always based with the idea in mind of the sanctity of existence. We miss it all the time. We miss it with abortion. We miss it with other things. We miss it with gay marriage. But we are seeking the sanctity of existence in every single law.
Okay, well, I don't know. I feel like my understanding of the term, I guess, is it's not leading me to that step, right? Where life being valuable means that life must take precedent in all cases, right? I think there's maybe a step there that we're missing, because in a lot of senses, that life is valuable, yes, but life isn't necessarily as valuable in each context, right? Suddenly, the same valuation system applies to the rock as does to the baby. That it's the context that baby occurs in that makes it valuable or not valuable.
But there's a scale, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where I agree with you, and I think that's where I really want to put that, is because like I actually do agree that there is, if we're talking about sanctity of existence in terms of a scale upwards from a little bit sanctified is the word we're using, so a little bit valuable to very ultimately valuable, let's say. Okay, so there should that okay, then we can see evaluation in that scale.
Is there
Yeah, I mean, is there any point there when you might say that something in existence isn't valuable, or it would be valuable to get rid of it from existence?
If it, you could be indifferent toward it, number one, or it could be such that it brings danger, in your view, to the sanctity of existence, and therefore it would be eliminated. And some people, and let's look at this, John. Let's imagine every society shuns axe murderers because we all know they're broken. There's something wrong with them. They do not value human existence the way they should. We all know that. We all have that instinctively. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of see it the same way as bears or tigers, right? Their valuation of our existence is in a similar state. They sort of don't care about it as much as we do. And so I think in that sense, we are right to segregate them from society, and do whatever we can to protect society from those dangers. But I think that's where I'm sort of losing you there, right?
Okay.
If everything is on a scale and it's all sanctified, if just by the matter that it exists, then aren't bears and tigers and serial killers just as deserving of the same rights that we give, like the same sanctity of existence that we.
No, because the level, we talked about scale, the scale of level is going to be set by the one that gives the existence. Would you agree with that? If, I'm just saying, I'm not saying you necessarily believe in it, but if contingent existence truly is contingent and it is brought into existence by something that gives it existence, then that scale of what is existence, what is important, whether it goes, goes down to pecking order, whatever it is set by the one that gives the existence, the owner, right?
Yeah, see, I definitely don't see that. Maybe I'm focusing too much on my comic book example. The creator set the value, but they don't set the value in its current state.
But the creator is a contingent that made that, but the creator is not giving existence to the comic book. Right,
but the value, down. Right? But we're talking about the creator giving value to the existence, right? It's the fact, like you stated that it's the fact that the creator has given that value, that he is existing and created the existent thing that gives it the value. And I think I can't quite get my head around that because valuation changes so much, right? The value we give it changes compared to what the original creator gives it. But maybe there's an analogy problem there.
There is. It's a breakdown.
Obviously, because I think we're just trying to discuss things that are just completely different.
They're not completely different, but they're not univocal. I mean, there is an analogy there, but they're not univocal. And they're
cool.
Because we're talking about self-existence and contingent existence.
Yeah, it's cool. Okay, well, I mean, I think I'm sort of willing to leave that alone. I think we've kind of maybe gone in a little bit of a circle there. I think we'll just kind of have to.
Well, that was a bit of a rabbit trail, but I want to take it.
I agree. But I think it's fun to talk about because these things are actually a lot of the topic that R.C. Gets into, right? I mean, there is this element there where he does actually kind of go into this valuation system. But I feel like he really does kind of leave it just asserted that the creator gives it the value, and I think that's sort of maybe the same thing I'm hearing from you. And I don't know
that I've heard him teach directly on that. That's kind of just something I've thought through myself.
I think it's in here. You're right. You're right that I don't think he lays it out quite like that, but I think that is the basic the way that he does.
I think you would agree with that completely.
Yeah, I think so. So I think we're good on that. One of the things I did really want to hit with you was the idea of general revelation. I think there was I had a real confusion about it because I think R.C. Sproul goes back on what he means by that, or at least he goes back on the hard distinction that I felt was going between general revelation and special revelation. So from what I understand and what he kind of says, that general revelation, where did I write it down here? Natural theology. I didn't mark it anywhere. Natural. All right. So yeah. Okay. Here it is. So general revelation is let's see here. There's two different types of it. There's the mediate and the immediate. So the mediate is the one that God gives to all people. So it's directly through some medium. Right, so the mediate's like nature, the heavens, I think is how he kind of puts it. When we look around, we see a logical progression, and so we know that God's nature must be logical.
That's my argument.
Yeah, no, I think I'm getting that. Okay, so it's in the glory of God, and the other one is immediate. So God gives it directly to people.
That would be your moral sensibility that we were just talking about.
Right. So yeah, he says the law written on the hearts of men, and I think he gives the conscience as a direct evidence of that, which I think is, I would disagree, obviously, that is divinely related. But I think that there's an element there where I think that it is useful to talk about that type of revelation, right? I think that it really does explain a lot of what is being discussed here when we're talking about the noumenal realm being evidence of God, right? Of this, these things that seem intangible being evidence of something that is divine or supernatural in that sense. But the other one is special revelation, right? And that is the Bible and the salvation message and the gospel specifically. And I was curious about the idea, right? Because when he goes into general revelation, he says that this is the indictment to all of humanity, right? This general revelation, which I'm assuming he must mean that this general revelation of our fallenness, right? The indictment is I think he discusses it as the charge against us, right? And I think that's got to be to do with something that we've failed to do or that is a failure within ourselves. And I find that it makes sense to group that with our conscience and with our law written on our heart, but I think it's difficult to see how the indictment really sticks when there is a level of special revelation that's required to address what is the problem. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think I brought this up to you briefly in our hangout there, that I felt like where I think he's right to say that if Kant is right, if we don't have direct knowledge of the indictment, there is no indictment, basically, right? Like and so I think that's where I think those two kind of mesh together, where he really needs Kant to mesh together with this idea of special revelation, because general revelation, because the divine aspect of that has to be an acknowledgement of our conscience, acknowledgement of our guilt, and then the knowledge of that, which is going to be claimed to be suppressed here, requires us to know what it is that we did, and know that we have failed somehow, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's where my disconnect is, because in order to fail, I have to not gain salvation, right? And I think that's where my disconnect is, right? Like, to fail, I need to know the special revelation, and he admits that doesn't get to everybody. There's no way that gospel message can get to everybody, even though the indictment is worldwide or universal.
Okay, John, do you think that atheists can be good without God?
Yes, I'm in some ways I actually think it's easier to be good without God, but yes, the answer to that is yes. I think they can be.
Okay, well, you just answered your own question.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you mean?
You just stated that there is such a thing as good and evil without even acknowledging God's whatsoever, which would make you culpable, would it not?
Well, okay, so right. But it makes me culpable without an indictment, right? There's no indictment that I don't know God or know the salvation if I can formulate a thought of good and evil without that.
Is it wrong for atheists to kill people?
Yes. It depends what context, right? Killing people is obviously context dependent, but in most
cases, do you need the Bible to tell you that?
No, definitely not.
Okay, so there is this inviolable moral law in mankind that is given without the Bible, right?
Well, but Kant sort of solves that problem, right? The imperative is universalizable, so we don't have to have a common source. We can simply think it through. It's rationally
That's exactly right.
justified.
That's my point.
Okay, so but I can think it through. It's rationally justified. I don't kill people because if everybody killed people, it would be a worse world, and I don't want to live in that world.
It would be non-existent.
I still don't know that there's a God. I still don't know that I am a fallen creature. That's
you're not self-existent, John.
I know I'm finite.
That's
but
right.
I only know
you didn't create yourself, right?
I only know that I have a finite beginning, but that even that is a fuzzy memory, right?
Okay.
So I don't know that I don't have an end. I haven't had one yet. I've seen people around me have ends, so I would assume that I'm going to die at some point. Addressing my own finitude, though, doesn't necessarily get me to there is a God into which I should call in order to be saved. I think that's disconnect. I can't quite see that, right?
Do you think you should be grateful to the one who gives you your existence?
Yes, but that's my parents, right? My gratefulness to the
No,
existence
your
are my
parents are not giving you ontological status right now. They were instrumental in creating you,
well,
but you are not self-existent.
but every single one of my ancestors is in the same boat as me, right? They were
That's
all
right.
finite
That's
as well.
exactly right. Exactly.
Right.
That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't get where suddenly there's this element of indictment. Like I don't get how I would know that I needed to seek God. And I mean, you're talking to someone who was a Christian, so I suppose like in a lot of ways that doesn't apply to me. But I'm trying to speak from, you know, where he's really getting it. Like it has to be universalizable to be a universal indictment. And it seems to me like you could get to the position where even your conscience was working perfectly fine, and you wouldn't need to reference that God or to seek that God's attention to satisfy any of that.
Okay, so in your from your perspective, then it is maybe your Pentecostalism, your Arminianism is speaking here to say that everybody should have a chance to be saved.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so you deserve salvation.
That's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah, I don't think I would go that far.
Then
I think
your argument fails.
Well, I mean, my deserving it though is not necessarily the issue here, right? My God wants to be justified in damning me to hell, right? I mean, I think that's the real point here, right? Like I don't necessarily need to deserve salvation, you know, for him to send me to hell. Is that what you're kind of saying? Like, because I feel like if I'm deserving of it, then God would be unjust not to give it to me.
Do you have a moral standard for yourself?
Yes, I think I do.
Do you meet that?
Yeah. I mean, not all the time, but
Okay.
obviously I have.
Obviously,
I have
no,
ideals.
You don't.
Yeah, I mean,
you
but
don't
obviously
even make your own standard. How, if there is a perfectly holy God, do you think that you somehow deserve His grace?
Well, I mean, this is the thing is I don't see it as losing, like, just because I don't live up to what I view as the ideal moral character or the ideal moral action. I don't think that I am not a good person or not trying to be a good person. And I take the fact that I feel bad about it and that my conscience is affected by it as a sign that I'm a good person, that I'm trying to be better. So I don't necessarily.
You don't measure up, right?
Yeah, but I think it's very strange to talk about. I mean, all humans create an ideal for themselves. All humans have this picture of the ideal human they're trying to reach, and I think that's not necessarily a new thing or an odd thing. I think that all of us do that, and I kind of feel in a lot of ways that maybe you're just doing that with your God, right? That the ideal version of moral interaction is what God wants you to do, and I think that's not a bad thing or a bad thing to aim for. But I don't think that is an indicator that there's something wrong with me or that I'm failing. I think humans are, like I was saying before. I mean, I think humans are rational, and I don't think that we always think through all of our responses and actions.
But you are sure that you fail your own moral standard, right?
Oh, I mean, obviously. I mean, I think it would be unrealistic to even expect to live up to an ideal like that.
Is there any person that ever lived that you would think of existentially who has ever lived up to the standard that they have for themselves?
A standard that they had for themselves? Now, that's a good question, right? I think people do reach those levels of real self-actualization.
So they never fail.
They reach a point where their moral systems are
so lame that they can make it. Like Charles Manson.
It's difficult, right? It's difficult to say, right? I mean, I can't speak for everybody, and I'm not going to try to claim that there is some perfect example out there.
I'm just something to think about.
But I feel, but I mean, I do feel that there are people who reach levels of virtuosity and really engender a virtue, and work hard at becoming better people. And
Sure.
Those people can succeed and be really great people. But I know myself that, like, I'm not the same person every day, right? I mean, I can be a little off my game or a little grumpy. I can have situations in my life that are going to make me less less agile or less understanding, right? And I think that there are elements there where I'm going to be emotionally affected by the situations that come into my life, and I don't think anybody's immune from that. And I don't think that necessarily means we fail. I think it means that we are affected, and I think that means that we're humans trying to learn how to be better. And that's why I say that, I think I always try to define good as better. I want to improve myself. And I think that's what's going to keep me out of the liability of dogmatic thinking or sort of the element of monoculture that can invade a lot of these smaller groups here on YouTube.
Yeah, I agree.
But so that's I maybe think that we just come up to an hour and 15 minutes. Man, that just flew by, Trey. I gotta say, that was a lot of fun. We didn't get to we didn't get into the 4 possibilities. So obviously we haven't gotten anywhere close to what Sproul
it's
was
Sproul,
talking
by the
about.
Way. It's pronounced with an O.
Sorry, Sproul. I don't know. It's that U at the end that gets me.
It looks like Sproul or something, or Sproul.
Sproul.
It's Sproul.
Yeah.
It's just what.
Sproul. I'll try to do that. You notice I'm really bad at pronunciation sometimes. Yeah, exactly. That's why I say can't. I got can't. Reading me some can't. No, yeah, it's terrible, right? We're really bad. Like unless it's a French pronunciation, I'm just terrible at it. So I'm kind of willing to leave it at that. I got a lot off my chest, and I feel like I actually understand your position a little bit better than I did before. So that's a positive move. I think we kind of found some disagreement in attributing valuations to things, and I think that's maybe something that we're going to have to kind of butt heads on again. Did you have any questions for me? Like, did you were you curious about any of my positions, or were you worried about? Were you worried that I was going to be like a little more caustic than this, or anything like that? Because I think,
no, I didn't think you would be caustic at all, because it's obvious it's very important for you to be charitable. But it's very helpful for you to give me your background. And one thing I like about doing Hangouts, usually when I start them out, if I were hosting, I would have said, "Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?" Because I like to get to know the people and understand where they're coming from. It's really helpful for me to understand your framework. What makes you tick, because we're all a product of our lives, where we came from and what has formed us. And I know that your Christian, you would say your Christian background has had a significant formation on you, even though you don't consider yourself a Christian anymore. But anyway, knowing about that is a lot. Now, you're not married or anything, are you?
No, I'm single.
Okay, do you mind telling me what you do for a living, or you?
Yeah, no, I'm a refrigeration mechanic. I'm a journeyman out here in Edmonton. Work for a small little refrigeration company. Do air conditioners, refrigerators, walk-in coolers, and things like that. So
cool. Well, that's great. And so you're basically a self-taught guy. Then you're like most of the guys on YouTube.
I dropped out of university in the first year. I was taking just a Bachelor of Arts. I took a little psychology, a little philosophy. I'm a painter and a guitar player. But it's just really always I just kind of had this appetite for reading that sort of continued from about 19 on. Like I really I wasn't like my childhood was very, like I was saying, that I was very it almost felt like very isolated, very sealed in a lot of ways. And so I really didn't have access to what was called secular music, secular books, secular TV shows, secular movies. So
when you got out of the house, you went, wow.
When I turned 19, like I immediately started collecting I just asked people, what movies do I need to watch? What music do I need to listen to? And I just gathered as much as I could. I just tried to fill my head, and included in that was reading that, got along to philosophy, and ended up being, one of the first books I read on it was The Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, which is like an amazing book. I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's just it's really great breakdown of a lot of the problems of major philosophy in modern times, and a lot of it still is applicable today. And so from there I've really tried to immerse myself in not only in pop culture, but in academic circles, and tried to be a little more rigorous with my thought. And I feel like that I'm absorbing a lot, and that I've gotten a lot better even just in the last year. So there's always room for improvement, and I strive to achieve it.
So how long have you been around in the community then?
I think I was trying to do an add up the other day. It's got to be close to 4 years now.
Okay.
It seems like time's just flying. One of my first hangouts actually was with G-Man. It's way back in, I think that was in 2012.
I bet that was exciting.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. I got to hear all about his answered prayer argument, and it was wonderful. No, but I really do like doing these hangouts with, especially with people of a more fundamentalist or evangelical background. And I'm not really sure why that is. Like I'm very attracted to the ideals of it. There's sort of an element of, I don't know exactly how to explain it. I'm trying to think of the right word here. It's almost like a type of self-denial. Like you're getting rid of yourself in an attempt to embody something larger than yourself. And I feel like there is almost this element that's very attractive to me of being very like submissive in that sense of falling into line underneath dogmatic thinking. And I feel like that's really what I miss about the whole religious experience is this real sense of steadiness, this real sense of having a steadfast position. And a lot of that's obviously going to be that I was very young when I was a believer, right? So a lot of that's just going to be general, like teenagers who think that they know everything, right? I mean, once you get a little knowledge in your head, you sort of the tendency is to think you know a lot of things. And I definitely fell prey to that. And so I wanted to make sure that I would never that would never happen to me again. That I was always going to have a really great reason and try to think about things as seriously as I could. And I think one of the big things I wanted to do was never dismiss somebody simply because they disagreed with me. And I don't know, it's almost more important to me to make sure that I don't dismiss people who disagree with me on things that I used to believe, right? Like because that's almost like a validation that I wasn't a stupid person back then. I wasn't unintelligent back then, right? I mean, I was a straight A student, and I quite, I was on the honor roll, and I was actually a great student out there. But I think that the limitations of my world were what was keeping me sort of from expanding on that knowledge.
Sure.
So I try to, I'm trying to say to people that these people aren't the just because we don't quite understand what they're saying, it doesn't mean that they're wrong or they're stupid or that they're not understanding basic concepts, right? I think that sometimes just our experiences are different.
Well, yeah, but I think I think it's fair to say that evangelicalism today is in a very emaciated state, and I think that the experience that you had. Just from I grew up in charismatic church. I got saved in charismatic church. Okay. And so Pentecostal, I would say, is another step, even a little bit farther than that, or further than that. But Pentecostalism, it's on that side of the spectrum doesn't value the mind. It does not value this world because Jesus is coming back.
Right.
And especially in the 80s, and I remember everybody said, oh, within 10 years, Jesus is coming back. And it utterly, this is dispensationalism, I think, it crippled the church. When you don't have education, you don't have anything. And when you throw the mind out, and that's why I don't like presuppositionalism. The more I hate it. And I don't hate my brothers who are presuppers, because there's some really intelligent people that are, but I just hate anything that puts the mind down, because God has called us to love him with our minds. The entire scientific revolution, I believe, was an act of worship among people they were almost all Christians who were the fathers of the movement. So, like I said, I think Kant is a big part of that. But I don't blame you for having this visceral, or the atheist having this visceral response against fundamentalists, because fundamentalism it is morphed into something really negative, and it's anti-intellectual. It's King James only. It's preaching hellfire without any compassion. It's dogmatic assertion without justification. And so I am sympathetic to that. but I'm also very critical that Christianity in America today is very, well, in the Western world, is in a very sick state. And that's what R.c. Sproul said. He says we're living in a new dark age. So he's very critical as well. So
well, I think that's one place where me and RC definitely agree. I think there's an element of anti-intellectualism then that sort of has pervaded evangelical circles, as if we have to push against what might be considered secular philosophy, even when it's like as well. I think it was like he said it a couple times. Tertullian's, what does Jerusalem have to do with Athens, right? Yeah. He wants to say, there's this idea that we need to separate the logical from the theological, which I think is. It's an interesting way of looking at it, but I think that's really it is one of the reasons why the church is having such trouble, right? And I'd like to agree with you. I think Pentecostalism especially is it's very focused on the experience of God, on very visceral experiences of God. So manifestations of the Holy Spirit, being drunk in the Spirit, slain in the Spirit, talking in tongues. These things are all quite normal, almost considered requisite for being within the church. And I think that focus really does make it difficult to really get a rigorous intellectual standard that really infests the community there, right? When it's all very focused on the now and the feeling, I think that there is no encouragement to look into apologetics or any of the doctrine. So
not at all. And that's why I'm very critical of it. And the glory about charismatic movement, Pentecostal movement, what they're trying to do is to reinvest a dead movement with the life of the Spirit. But unfortunately, from the very beginning, from the Azusa Street Revival, it was based upon really, really bad theology and anti-intellectualism. And what it does is, once you get into charismatic church, it's a great place for me to get saved. I got saved at an organization called Youth with a Mission. You ever heard of it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, I got saved in YWAM. Actually, I went to their program in 1986. They have a year-long discipleship program. You have a 3 months in class training and then 2 months on the field. And we went to Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Went to these places. And it was wonderful. I had so much fun. And it was a wonderful place to get saved because the songs that you sing are really simple. They're really heartfelt. Gospel's really simple. I finally understood it. I didn't understand it until I got down there. And the problem is once you get the gospel, there's nothing more. And after a while, it's like, what? I left the charismatic movement a long time ago. And here's the problem, that all of Latin America, all of Africa, they have these missionaries that are all zealous or charismatic and Pentecostals that go down there. And that's what they have. You got Roman Catholicism and you got charismaticism, and it's just, and there's no mind in either of them, really. And
right. Obviously, and my own experience was obviously one of, it was a difficult transition to make, even coming out of Pentecostalism, right? And I think the reason for that was they were very hesitant to address my questions directly. I had further thoughts about the doctrine itself, and it seemed like people were very, very quick to give me advice to simply, meditate in the Spirit on it, or you just need to, why don't you just speak in tongues for a while and it'll solve its problem itself. And to me that feels just dishonest, right? If I have those doubts were, I seem to be the only one around me who realized that those doubts were an indicator that I wasn't saved, right? That there are elements of me that might have been slipping or had never been saved. And I think that's not necessarily a doctrine that goes all the way across evangelical circles, but I had that idea in my head that it's the possibility, right? And I wanted to address them as honestly and as openly as I could. And that was something that just wasn't allowed in that sense. So I moved on to churches where it was a little more open. But even from there, I felt like my questions maybe weren't being addressed in the most direct way. One of the thoughts that really got me out of religion, especially away from the evangelical circles, was this idea that if God wanted me up in heaven, He wanted me there honestly. He wanted me there in a very genuine way. I don't think He would want a faker or want someone who had doubts but decided to tamp them down, right? So I really felt like that was what pushed me to really address these things myself and to really investigate it and question my own position in that sense.
And there were really no answers, right? once you start
Yeah, I
pushing.
mean, it became very clear that they weren't willing to have those discussions. It seemed like I was opening up doors that they weren't willing to walk through, and
Right.
I like part of me felt like, I questioned for a long time whether or not I needed to get away from the church in order to have those to further discover what it was to be myself and to mean something. But in the long run, I did step away from church, and it did allow me a space to really get into questioning myself rather than relying on some other method of getting towards that. So, but I mean, those things are, it's clearly just anecdotal and personal, and I feel like it's not necessarily typical for most people coming out. And I hope if someone hears this, they feel like they're not alone in that sense.
I think your story is very common.
I think, yeah, and I think we do need more Christians to sort of admit to various levels of doubt and to really wrestle with that doubt, right? To really be open about it. And I think that's what's really missing out of that evangelical circle is especially just that admission really does open up a level of honesty that would be
and
perfect.
Not only do I think it's something that they had to open themselves up to, I believe the Bible commands it. First Thessalonians 5:21 says, test all things, hold fast to that which is true. What does it mean to test? Doubt it. We are called to doubt it. I doubt my faith every day as much as I can so that I can know that it's true. R.c. Sproul says this. He goes, I take a list, and he goes, I regularly do this, and I write out the things that I cannot doubt, and I try to doubt them. And by doing that, you verify yourself. That's why I'm as confident as I am in my view. I'm convinced it's true. I've tested it. I've pushed it. And it's so really God's calling us to not. That's what I remember I said about presuppositionalism. I think it's dangerous, but that's exactly what you experienced in your Christian walk. Is that they said you are not allowed to question, and there's a difference between questioning authority and questioning authority in a rebellious fashion. In other words, I don't know if you ever saw that bumper sticker that says "question authority." I would like to say, yeah, question authority respectfully. We need to be respectful. We need to be kind and charitable toward people. But we do. R.c. Sproul, one thing he taught me to do is to own my ideas. And he talks about all the time and several times in his life. He has very high level theologians. He had a very liberal, seminary experience and stuff. And I remember him talking about one who's a very famous theologian. He was a seminary student, and he made a contradictory statement. And he said it in a real hushed tone and really a spiritual sort of way. And all the students, when they got into the class, they're going, whoa, man, that was so heavy. I can't get my mind around it. And R.c. Sproul was laughing. They said, what are you laughing about? And he said, what he said was nonsense. And he said, we need to test it. And they were all like going, how could you laugh at him? Or how could you make fun of him? He goes, it was foolish. He did not make any sense. And of course, you need to be respectful about this stuff. But the thing is I hear people all the time with very high-level standards of education say silly things all the time. And that's why I laugh. People get mad at me. I laugh. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I am wearing myself on my sleeve. I say, if you say something silly, I'm going to say, that is silly. To me, I could be wrong, but that's just the way I am. I like to wear I usually whatever comes in my head goes out my mouth. Sometimes I got to watch that. But I like that's what I love about Luther. I don't know if you're familiar with Martin Luther. I was just telling a friend of mine, we were talking about it last night. He had some really bad, lopsided things to his personality. You can look up Martin Luther. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like "Insult Me, Martin Luther." And there's a meme generator that just gives you quotes about Luther insulting you. He was so rough and so mean. But the thing I love about him is he was so genuine. I heard somebody say one time, Al Mohler, I think he said, I would have loved to have lived with Luther and sat under Calvin to teach me, but lived with Luther because he was a real deal. And that's what I think we need to be. We need to be real. We don't need to be rude. But I don't know where I was going with all that. But anyway.
No, I really appreciate that. I mean, because I think there is this element of like a hesitancy to challenge authority. But I mean, Sproul sort of goes in. I mean, when he's talking about the idea of contradiction, and that theologian who utters an apparent contradiction, and people sort of feel like he's whispering some sort of knowledge, right? And I think that is true. I mean, I think there is a danger in that, but that sometimes the context of the class in which that thing is uttered sort of can create
Yeah.
an alternate meaning, right? So like, if he was to say something that appeared contradictory, it is possible that, within the context of that theology or within that class that he's talking about,
Makes
even
sense.
that apparent contradiction might
Sure.
end up being meaningful. So I don't know. I think R.c.Sproul he doesn't actually say what the contradictory thing was, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, are you talking? Did he say it in that series? I don't know. I get mixed up with
Yeah,
series.
maybe he did.
I think he said something is and is not at the same time in the same relationship. It was a direct contradiction. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
God. Oh, what did he say? God is something about the nature of God.
Oh yeah, like God is like immanent and transcendent or something like that, which is I think is a direct contradiction from each other. Maybe it was here.
In the same relationship. Of course, he is immanent and he is transcendent in two different relationships. I can't remember if that's what it was. I didn't know it was in this series. I thought I was quoting a different series you weren't familiar with.
No, yeah, I think he does mention it in that series. And you know what, I sort of have that same problem. That I think it's a little uncharitable to call it a contradiction or to laugh at it necessarily, right? I think that in some senses, right? Like, I mean, the concept of the Trinity could be taken as an apparent contradiction, right? But
it doesn't violate logic.
But it only doesn't violate logic because of the context which we surround it in, right? Like
That's
3 and 1.
That's pretty simple.
3 and 1 isn't necessarily a contradictory statement, but
you're talking about two categories.
But to say that
3 and 1 in essence
exist in one essence, I think is a difficult concept to really explicate, right?
It cannot completely understood, but it's not a contradiction.
But I mean, if all it is a mystery, right? I mean, r.c.sproul says that mysteries have to be able to be explained at some point, or there has to be the possibility that they could be explained.
That's a paradox.
No, a paradox is an apparent contradiction. So that's a contradiction that has been explained. Mystery only has the requirement for the possibility of explanation, which I think
it does not. Because mystery can be enshrouded in ontological distinctions that cannot be communicated.
But I think that goes against the example he gives for mystery is electricity. He says that he doesn't understand it, but if he calls an electrician, someone does understand it.
I'm not saying a mystery cannot. I'm not saying all mysteries cannot be explained. I'm saying there is an element of some mysteries that are incommunicable. Let me just say it. There's two categories. Certainly, there can be a mystery that is not yet unexplained. Yeah, I'll grant that.
Okay. Yeah. No, I can definitely see that. Some of that contradiction, paradox, mystery talk, though, I felt like the terms can end up getting mixed together, right? Because simply because you don't see the solution to a contradiction doesn't mean it's not a paradox, right? There may be an apparent contradiction there. Right. In only sense, right. and the possibility of seeing the solution to an apparent contradiction is maybe a mystery, right? But I think that mystery can be used in other senses, in the way that he's using it, right? He's talking more maybe about a mysterious concept than just a statement being a mystery. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, because I think that's maybe what would be enwrapped, right? Because I think the idea of the Trinity, or that God is all man, all human, or all God, all human, right? Like, those things would be apparent contradictions, right? So you could say they're a paradox, but I think that the explanation of them is not necessarily seeable right away, right? I mean, it's not something that we can understand, and so we're sort of inferring that there's a possibility of, well, okay, yeah. So, but you think that we can at some possible point, right? Like, not now, but
I don't know every element of the hypostatic union. I don't say we can necessarily understand it, but the fact that God took on an additional nature, so he's 100% man and 100% God. There's nothing difficult to understand about that, at least not to me.
Well, I mean, it's just because, if I was to say I was 100% human and 100% frog, right? Like,
he took on an additional nature.
But it would be difficult for me to make that explicable in a logical sense or any sort of coherent sense, right? I mean, I think that it would be difficult to explain it to somebody as a concept, because 100% of each is by definition a whole, right? And now there's two wholes if we're talking about 200%.
Yes, but they're two ontologies.
Yeah, I get that they're two ontologies, but that still leaves us with the problem that the conclusion yields a 200%. And I think
No, it
that's
doesn't, because
where
they're two different ontologies.
But okay, so they're explaining two different aspects of the same person.
It is one person, but it's two essences.
Because it's just like when I think about essences, I think about singular essences, right? Like it would be difficult for maybe not. I'll have to think about that. I'm trying to put it in maybe a Platonist sense of essences, right? Where, and now that I think about it, like, why couldn't something have two essences corresponding in one person or one object? I don't see why not. You could have a chair TV, right? It would have essence of chairness and essence of television in it.
Are you Platonic?
No, I'm not. I'm trying to put it in that sense, because when he talks about essences, it does seem like he's referring to not necessarily that there is a thing out there, but that we form it in this pure form of an essence. I think he goes that far with it, but maybe not as far as reifying the concept.
Okay.
Do you find that? Do you find the way that R.C. sort of sums up the lecture series like is really convincing? Because I kind of felt like towards the end he since we haven't gone into the center of it or the main argument, I don't want to kind of get like whether or not I think it's wrong or right, but I think he attributes a motivation for his opposition not believing, and I feel like that's, it may be biblically supported, but I feel like it's not necessarily a charitable position to put your opposition in. Like it's simply because he talks about, that we have the motivation that of course we're not going to accept any proof, no matter how logical it is. It's because we don't want to be acknowledging that we have sin or that we are going to be held accountable in some sense. And I don't know. I don't think that that's really an accurate sense, right? I think that even if I believed that there was a God, I wouldn't necessarily follow that I'm going to be held accountable for actions, right? Like there has to be another step where I am an immortal being who's going to be held accountable at the end.
Yeah, but you've already admitted that you're an immoral person.
No, immortal. Sorry, because I'm going to be judged on whether or not I am a moral person or sanctified in that to be as if I was a moral person. But I think there's another assumption there, right? Where like even if I accept that a God exists and is eternal, then I have to move to this sense that I am eternal in order to be punished by that God, right? Suddenly, I at least have to exist beyond the level of my own life in order to make that punishment happen. So I think that's a weird step to skip over, right? Like you almost have to prove the existence of an eternal soul in that sense.
Well, I think but the whole thing of punishment is a function of eternal punishment is a function of special revelation.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense actually. Okay. But then like but if he's inferring that it's my motivation that makes me not want to accept the proofs of God, then how can how can he ever hope for the apologetic to be successful, right? Like, if the defense is simply consequential in nature, then doesn't he have to address my motivations for the consequence, or for thinking the consequence is wrong, in order to really convince me?
No, I think I'm going to come from a Reformed perspective that no man has any desire to acknowledge what they know to be true unless God enables them to do that. Because Adam, as our federal head, plunged us into a position of inability to even love God.
But by know to be true, you mean the knowledge of original sin, or the indictment is what you're talking about?
Knowledge of the God of creation. Now many people will acknowledge there is a creator, but they will not acknowledge his holiness. So I kind of lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, no problem. I like because I think that's right. I mean, he does say that we exchange the truth of God for a lie. What else does he
And
say? It's something about
worship the
yeah,
creature
yeah,
rather than the creator.
yeah. I think that there is there's definitely he definitely implies that. I don't know if he's yeah, I know he does say and that we end up being reduced to sort of meaninglessness. Where else does he say that? Wow. Yeah, his last. But I mean, by the end of it, I was just kind of writing down the things that he said verbatim. Like it's almost just like a transcript that I wrote out. Because
You must be a fast writer.
Yeah, I am. Like I got a pretty fast shorthand, but I had to pause it a couple times.
I would
but
be pausing constantly.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, it's really about this, this idea of truth suppression, right? Like he talks about this, that I would be pushing against the truth, but I think it's weird to talk about truth suppression of a single aspect of truth, and yet that I would accept the value of true facts in my belief system in every other part of my life, right? I think that there's an element there of sort of being accused of compartmentalization of the God belief, and sort of putting it in a box that I'm not like holding it to a certain rigor that I'm not holding the rest of the world with, or maybe the opposite, that I'm not addressing it in the way that I'm addressing my valuation of truth in the rest of my life. And I wonder if you feel like that's an accurate description of disbelievers, because I think in a lot of senses I do value truth like quite a bit, and I want to know if there is a God out there. That is something that I desire, and it feels like to be accused that my motivation is not to see that is, I don't know, it feels like he's not addressing how I feel anyways, and I don't know if that's a mischaracterization, if it could be called uncharitable, or maybe he's addressing a separate point of view. And I think that that's probably more likely, that he's got a very specific criticism in mind that I'm not necessarily coming to the discussion with.
Well, I just, from a biblical perspective, like I said, when Adam was our federal head, he was a representative for us. So when he sinned, we were all judged and lost our capacity to love God unless he acts upon us. Jesus said, "No man can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him." In other words, it didn't mean nobody may. He said can. In other words, has the ability. Nobody has the ability unless God draws him. And so unless God takes out that heart of stone and gives you a heart of flesh, you will not love him. You will compartmentalize God. Now, that's not going to say you're going to say, "Oh, I don't believe in God." No, you won't believe in the God of Scripture, who is holy and will judge you for your sins. I mean, there's all kinds of people that say they believe in God, and you look at their lives, they call themselves Christians. You look at their lives and you think, nah. And this is one thing I want to touch on, John. It's really important for me. Is the thing I see, this is the thing that I find frustrating on YouTube, and I kind of keep on the fringe for some of this. The people that call themselves Christians on here don't act like Christians. And my question is, what good is your religion if it doesn't make you holy?
I couldn't agree more with you, Trey. I mean, I think that's really hits at it, right? Like I think what I want out of theology is signs of improvement in people, right? I think that's the most convincing argument you could make.
And do you see that on YouTube?
You are a good person. Yeah. And I mean, that is really one of the worst, I think it is one of the worst witnesses, is to see Christianity, how it manifests itself sometimes on YouTube. And I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah, I think theology should encourage us to be better people. And if it's not, I mean, what are we doing it for, right? I mean, yeah. I think God wants us to, I mean, I know that James is sort of a controversial book in the Bible, but I mean, he really wants us to know us by the fruits, right? I mean, there has to be this element that we are manifesting what it is that we're embodying, right? Like, and if that's not happening, then how do we know? I mean, how would anybody know if not by the behavior that we see?
Amen. Like, preach it, brother.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Like, I feel like that's one of the things that does draw me to Christianity, is like this real focus on genuineness, right? Like you can suddenly, there is this aspect of believing it in a very genuine way that becomes valuable. And I think that's something that we can all take. I think that, being genuine in our beliefs is in fact like something that's very important. And, I think that some people embody that and other people's not so much.
Yeah. And I think that it's so important. This is the thing I keep harping is everybody I talk to, it's so important for us to own our ideas. Don't just believe somebody because you say it. I mean, I have atheists all the time, and I, of course, have Christians as well. And they just follow people because they tell them as an authority they believe in. I'm like, stop that. Don't do that. You check it out. Does it make sense to you? If it doesn't make sense, don't hold to it.
Yeah, I think it sounds a lot like Sartre's idea of like bad faith, where to be an authentic person, to be like a real human, you need to sort of accept that you are the one directing your choices, accept the responsibility for directing your own life, and that to simply pretend like you need an authority to tell you, or that you're simply reacting to the authority that's giving it to you, is sort of inauthentic. It's very, it's not the way to live a real life that is passionate and worth living.
Yeah, but Sartre was not consistent with his view, and he was not thoughtful with his metaphysical thinking, and he was a pervert. He's not somebody
I don't know too much about his personal life, but I have heard it was a little sordid. But you're right. I mean, I think Sartre becomes, Sartre sort of moves from existentialist thinking to this really like crazy off the wall sort of thinking towards the end of his life. I think he was doing a lot of speed though, so it's maybe understandable that he might have been losing his faculties a little bit, and seeing things from a very different perspective. But I mean, he had some great ideas about life worth living and authentically being in the world that we exist in.
But he couldn't do it in his own life, right?
No, yeah. I mean, I think there was an element there where he was obviously trying to cover up sort of this sort of inadequacy in his own life that was sort of being, and I think a lot of philosophy is about that. I think we address the things that we see as weaknesses in ourselves a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. And so here's the thing I want to say is, this is what I always tell people this, and I tell the young people in church, I teach Sunday school, and I say this: when somebody comes to you with a view that they are telling you something is different than what you've been taught in church or what your parents have lived out, because the people in my church, generally speaking, they live what they say. There's a consistency, and the kids are just wonderful kids. And I say, when you go to college and somebody gives you a new view, I want you to ask them to show you the money. In other words, show me what kind of life you live to back up to say that what you are is true. And my favorite example is Friedrich Nietzsche. He was the Ubermensch. And if there was anything about Nietzsche's personal life, he was anything but an Ubermensch. So, and same with Sartre. When they give you these big shot ideas, look at the secret part of their lives. Look at Bertrand Russell. I shouldn't call people names. He was an unethical man, and in a serious sort of way. So don't tell me that you have the answers and then live a life like the devil, because I don't want that.
Well, I mean, I think I would disagree that Bertrand Russell was unethical. I think he had a very reasoned ethical position.
No, you need to look at his life, my friend. He seduced a young girl. He ran around on his wife. He was a philanderer. He was a dirtbag.
I get it. And I mean, I'm not trying to say that they are any sort of hero or ideal that we might want to live up to.
And I think your point.
Well, no, but I think there needs to be some realization that we all idealize what the perfect activity might be. And I think you're right to look to their life to see how they applied it and whether or not it worked. But I don't think that diminishes the value of the ideal that they posited, right? There may in fact be value in that ideal, whether or not they reach it or not.
It was a lopsided worldview. It doesn't make sense. It didn't give honor to the one who gives them existence, and it was evidenced in their lives.
But I mean, is giving honor always evidenced by that person acting perfectly, right? I mean, I think the people who embody that worshipfulness and theological thought don't necessarily yield fruit any better than the atheist side. And
then don't follow them. They're hypocrites. They're liars.
Right.
They're not real.
Well,
Jesus gave the highest standard of ethical value. Would you agree with that?
No, but there is. No. I mean, there are some amazing moral elements, but I think Jesus was he's a little derivative of a lot of what might be called Eastern thought, but I mean he opened things up in a very authoritarian system of thought, right? I mean he was the one who brought in. No, I mean he was the one who brought in the idea of motivation as the important aspect of morality, right? That intentionality really is the key to addressing what might be called the failings in moral creatures. So I think that he had a lot of great ideas, but you know his statement of the golden rule is backwards, and it ends up creating a liability in the golden rule that doesn't exist. Well, the statement of the golden rule is that do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But the problem with that is that if you want something done to you that another person doesn't want done to them, you've now done something immoral, right? I mean, that is the liability. It doesn't work with serial killers or sociopaths, and it doesn't work with masochists either. So there's an element. There's an element there where there's a liability to be immoral, even though it's considered a golden rule. So the platinum rule is do unto others as they would have you do unto them, and that necessarily.
Let me correct you. This is a thing that drives me nuts. I'm not criticizing you. The skeptical community thinks they're so smart and they are so stupid and so shallow. They think they know things so well. Jesus said the law and the prophets are based on 2 commands. Do you know what those are?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, and then love your neighbor as yourself. I think those are the 2.
So when you took the golden rule, you must filter it through those, because Jesus said all the law and the prophets are based upon those 2, right?
Right, but I mean that's another liability, right? That's another liability to assume that an external source is going to be the valuation for the moral assessment you're going to make. If you believe that God wants you to kill that person, it doesn't matter what the person is or how much you love them. You've already decided to love the Lord your God in. That's right. Priority,
so the love of God is above the love of neighbor, right?
Right. I think that's how he places it. It's very, very hierarchical. The way
hierarchical, because he is existence, this is dependent. All right, so it's kind of logical that this would be above this. Okay, so if a serial killer wants to be treated in such a way that dishonors this, then it's not the golden rule, right?
I don't necessarily see it that way, because the golden rule states that you're going to do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Under what God commands, right?
But you wouldn't have that person treat you as a serial killer, right?
No, because they're broken. They're not loving God.
So
right?
But I mean that's the antithesis of the golden rule. Then, if that's
it's not. It's to love the Lord your God first, then to love your neighbor as yourself. Is a serial killer loving God and doing what he wants him to do?
I don't know about serial killer's love for God or the knowledge.
Well, obviously,
I can't know
murder, right?
But I can't know that's not the golden rule or believing in the 2 most important commandments, right? I mean, we have to go to a 3rd or 4th. That's the 6th commandment.
No.
Murder,
all the commandments are based upon those 2 principles. That's what he said.
Right. But I think that's just where I'm saying that there's a moral liability in the golden rule that Jesus's formulation had that the Buddhist original formulation or the Confucius original formulation didn't have, right? And I don't mean it to say that Jesus isn't a moral teacher, and that because I actually do find that there is a lot to Jesus that I really enjoy. A lot of his teachings are quite poignant. A lot of the stories are quite good examples of proper moral assessment. And he really does talk about the valuation of intention that we really place on moral discussions. So in a lot of ways, I'm sympathetic to say that Jesus is a moral teacher, but I wouldn't say he's the most moral, right? I wouldn't say that he's the best or stated it the best.
Okay, I need to go, John. I got to get up early in the morning.
Absolutely. Trey, this has been an absolute pleasure. I want you to know that if you have any questions for me, let me know, and I'll probably have further questions for you. I'd really like to do another hangout about the 4 possibilities if we could. But if you get any time in the next week here or whatever, just let me know, and we'll try to arrange something like that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get together again. I'd love that. I enjoyed getting to know you and chatting with you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. Like I said, I mean, I'm not trying to say I'm like super smart or that I'm smarter than Sproul or anything like that. I just have problems with the ways sometimes he formulates it or puts things, and I think it's maybe we're just losing something in the translation.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that you're perceiving what he's saying and you're dealing with it in a thoughtful fashion, which is doesn't happen very often. So I'm very grateful for that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no trouble. It's my pleasure, and like at the very least, I want to take you seriously and take Sproul seriously, and like let you know that I do actually wish you peace and love, my friend.
Well, I wish you peace and love too. Well, John, thank you very much. All right, we'll see you. Have a good one.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one. Bye.